Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this HVG event. It's one of the most popular events of the year. It is a look ahead at what potentially is in store for us in the voluntary world. And I'm really delighted to be joined by three fantastic panelists today who will introduce themselves shortly in turn. I do need to start, however, with an apology. So one of our panelists, the lovely Sam Clift from the London Transport Museum, sadly has fallen ill with the lurgies going around at the moment. So he sends his apologies, really wished he could be here, but he will be catching up in his own time. So a huge thank you instead to Rob, Matt and Chris who have joined us. What we're going to do, the way this is going to run, is we're going to hear from each of our panelists in turn. They're going to do a short introduction to a different part of the sector and focus and their thoughts on the year ahead. And then we're going to turn very quickly to your questions so that we can get through as many of those as possible. We're going to use the pigeonhole. I popped the link in the chat and I'll keep doing so as we go through so that we can take the questions that are of most interest to the collective mass in the room. So that is the way that we will get going. So it was my absolute pleasure to hand over first to Mr. Rob Jackson. Thank you, Rob.
Rhiannon. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you all. I promised my fellow panelists I would try and get this in under 5 minutes, which those of you who've heard me speak before know is a challenge. So I may now go at quite a pace to get everything in. So I picked 5 things to think about. Some of them a bit quicker, some of them a little bit longer than the others. So in terms of 2026, I think it's important to recognise as we kick this off that we're framing it in the context of this being another United Nations International Year of Volunteers. I'm old enough to remember the last one in 2001. But I think we, unsurprisingly, I suppose, have seen very little about that in the UK so far. 2001 was really quite a big year for a lot of countries, particularly in Africa, where they were developing a lot of their initial volunteering infrastructure. We've obviously got an infrastructure in place already. It's not really registering on the agenda, but if you don't know much about the International Year of Volunteers 2026, really encourage you to do a quick internet search, think about how it might help you frame things over the course of the next year, whether that's your strategy, your recognition, whatever else. Equally, for those of you who maybe missed the announcement around Christmas time, the big help out is back this year. Woo! Don't all get excited at once. Back end of Volunteers Week, big help out will be here again. More information will be coming very soon. It's a great opportunity to showcase and promote volunteering. It always has been that. I think the question for me, and this year's going to be pretty make or break really, is whether or not it's actually demonstrating any impact. There isn't a causal link, there is merely a correlative one. But if you look at the last few years of community life survey data since Big Help Out started, we're not really seeing any uplift in the indicators of public awareness of volunteering. So there's some question marks over whether that campaign has actually worked for us before now. And I think this year will be quite a pivotal year for that. The third area I think that's going to be interesting to look at is how our organisational leadership's understanding of volunteering diverges further and further from our understanding of volunteering as volunteer engagement professionals of volunteering. We know the reality of how people are adapting to post-COVID changes and how they want to volunteer, yet the pressure quite often from organisations I talk to, the pressure quite often from higher up in the organisation is an old school model of volunteer engagement, and that's causing a lot of tension and frustration. And I think that gap's going to grow probably before the people at the upper ends of organisations really start to realise the need for strategic change. I hope I'm wrong on that one. More than any of them, I hope I'm wrong on that one. But I think that will be an interesting one to watch over the course of the year. Does your leadership understand the reality of volunteering in 2026, or is it still back in 2006? A couple of questions relate to this one, interestingly, but I think we're going to see the dwindling importance of organisations as a means of making change happen in society. We've seen it most clearly in the last couple of weeks with the scenes in Minnesota and the protests against ICE. Got a lot of very good colleagues and friends in the Twin Cities who have been affected by that and who are part of that campaigning. And it speaks to the book that everybody was talking about probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, of new power and changing power models, changing power dynamics, growth of technology. Matt may well talk a bit more about this, and that's stuff we've talked about before, as to whether or not people really need our organizations to make a difference in the world anymore. And I think that's going to be a big one. And then I'm going to end on what I think might actually be quite a positive one, which is a new focus on employer-supported volunteering. So we have Govo, this new volunteering platform from RVS. They're making a big deal about that as a way of tapping into untapped potential in employee volunteering. The challenge for me has always been about how do we tap the small and medium-sized enterprise market, so businesses up to 250 people, not just the big businesses as well. So I think it will be interesting to see if that theme develops over the course of the next year and becomes something important, or just a way of organizations falling back on an old school model of volunteering without having to really strategically change. So that's just 5 things. I mean, I could have picked 50 things, but that's just the kind of 5 things that I think are going to be most interesting for me this year.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rob. That's a brilliant start to the session. Get those creative juices going for your questions. Can I hand over to Matt now?
Lovely. Thanks. It's always fun following Rob. Such a great speaker. So he's done some great stuff there, Rob. I'm just going to share my screen, folks. So bear with me a second while I do that. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. I'm getting a nod from Rhiannon. So okay, so let's dive in. So I think everybody probably on this call will probably know that at Heritage Volunteering Group, we talk a lot about the role that volunteering can play in transforming organisations, lives and communities. And today I've been asked to talk briefly about what 2026 holds in store for the way in which our work helps transform lives and communities in particular. But before I kind of get stuck into that, and hopefully my slides are going to start changing, they are indeed. What I want to do is just ask a few simple questions. So the first question, and if I could just get some virtual hands floating around on the screen, there's lovely celebration buttons, if you agree with the following statement. So who thinks that volunteering should be used as a way of helping young people succeed? I'm hoping I can see this. I don't know whether I can see any hands going up. Are they going up, Rhiannon? You'll have to give me a big nod. We're getting lots of... Rhiannon's giving me a big thumbs up there. Okay, next question is, should volunteering help people to age well and stay active? What are people saying, Rhiannon? I've seen a big love heart from Rhiannon that people are liking that. What about, should volunteering help build self-esteem and a sense of belonging and civic participation? Yes, so 3 big thumbs up there from Rhiannon and 3 big thumbs up from you guys as well. So, I think, as we've seen, most people generally think that volunteering can help in all these areas. So now I want to ask a 4th question, which is, should volunteering help the Labour Party deliver its political ambitions? Not so much. No, not so much, Rhiannon. No, I'm not getting yeah, that's what I thought, which is really interesting, because all of those questions that I asked, those first 3 questions, are at the heart of the Labour Party's political ambitions. And I guess for me, this presents us with a huge opportunity in 2026, because it means that we as volunteer engagement professionals have the chance to not only create roles that make a tangible difference to people's lives and communities they come from, but it means we've also got this chance to build political capital through volunteering. And this is something that our directors and our leadership teams can use to access funding or to build political goodwill and influence when working with local councils and local politicians. So if you do want to create volunteering opportunities that transform lives and build political capital, what are the kind of things that you want to be thinking about in 2026? Well, first thing is to think about using volunteering as a tool to help people gain new skills and experiences. So don't just think about the roles that people are doing, but consider the training that you offer alongside that and how that's helping them grow and develop. think about engaging more people aged 21 and under in volunteering, and then provide them with employability skills and training. So it's similar to that first area, but kind of focusing on that 21 and under age group. And this is important because there's a big focus on helping young people move along that pathway from higher education through into employment. Something that we've been talking about for a long time, but continue that work on reducing barriers to people from all backgrounds. So focus particularly on increasing opportunities for people from different ethnic minority backgrounds, and think of increasing social diversity as well. And this might be through targeted recruitment, it might be through partnership working, it might be through removing barriers from your internal processes. And we'd probably say, take a look at all of those areas. And then lastly, shout about how you help older people stay active and live healthy lives for longer. You're probably already doing a huge amount of work. If you're anything like some of our volunteer programs at Science Museum Group, we've got a huge number of older people. And as volunteer engagement professionals, we need to kind of recognise, not only the value that has to those people that are participating in the program, but the contribution that that's making to society through alleviating pressure on health services, for example. So you might want to think about how you demonstrate that by adding questions about health impact into your annual volunteer satisfaction survey. So actually you've got some good data to demonstrate the impact and contribution that volunteering is making on the lives of some of your older volunteers. And finally, once you start doing all of this, make sure you tell your leadership team about the amazing work that you're doing to build political capital, the amazing impact that you're having through you're making through volunteering. And you can do this. We do this at Science Museum Group through writing something called a volunteering impact report, and this highlights the role that the activities that volunteers undertake, the impact that they make to the organisation, and also how that's supporting broader political ambition. So just to give you an example, you might say something like 40% of our volunteers come from areas of high relative deprivation. Ensure we're playing a role in breaking the barrier between people's background and their success. And the last part of that sentence is very much language that's lifted from government documents. So just to kind of end by saying, so much of what the government is talking about, we're doing already, aren't we? We're creating inclusive volunteering programs. We're helping older people stay active. We're helping people gain new skills and experiences, and we're building civic participation and pride through volunteering. And in 2026, we need to get better at shouting about it so that our directors and our leaders, our senior leadership teams, can start to use volunteering to build political capital. And if we can do that, the impact that we'll make through volunteering will only grow and grow. And finally, if you want a practical example of an organisation that's doing this already, I suggest taking a look at the Pathways to Work case study that's on the HVG website from Barnsley Museum. It's a really good example of everything that I've just said, really, and that's on there for you to take a look at. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Matt. And just to say, we will be sharing these slides with you, so you will get those after the session as well. And lastly, it's absolutely my pleasure to invite Chris to speak. So Chris actually is a key figure in our event partner, TeamKinetic, and it's down to TeamKinetic that we are able to run these events because they are our event sponsor. So even more delighted to have you, Chris. Take it away.
Cheers, Rhiannon. It's a lovely pleasure to be here with you all today. And I'm going to sort of pick up where Rob and Matt have left off with some digital trends that we think that you're going to see over the next 12 months. These trends have been on their way for a while. Some of them are becoming more prominent. I think everybody in the room will be aware that there is this big AI monster looming in the very near distance. This idea that the volunteer and the relationship with the volunteer isn't quite as maybe firm as it was in the past. People's lives are changing, and their working hours are changing. It's no longer 9 to 5. The Amazon effect of people want things now rather than yesterday, and where they find those things, it needs to be instantaneous. And the ongoing effect of social media and its effect on general trust. People are looking for authentic experiences, but we live in a social media driven world, which is constantly undermining trust in society and communities. So there's a lot going on, should we say? In terms of our work as TeamKinetic and what we think are ways to sort of deal with some of this stuff, we've been involved in a piece of work that's been run by the Open Data Institute, been funded by by DCMS. It's brought together though people from DCMS, Department of Health, and a number of other government departments. Are all looking at how we better share data and how we prepare organisations with better infrastructure to be able to share data between different systems, between different organisations in a way that's open, transparent, fair, equal, equitable, etc., etc. And the quote you've got up on the screen there is one from NCVO. And really, this push towards open data is very much preparing us as a sector to have data that is more shareable, more equitable, and is machine readable for things like AI in the future. So this is a big piece of work that's going on. We're moving into the beta phase of this initial piece of work, and hopefully over the next few weeks and months, we'll be talking more about this. And you'll be starting to see examples of where open data becomes available in the sector and where you as organisations may be able to get involved with this approach. And from TeamKinetic, the kind of things we're looking at as a business, I think like natural language search, mission reports to be able to tell you better stories, AI-powered brokerage and machine-readable opportunities so we can better match volunteers to the things that they're looking for. Agentic AI, which sounds really scary, but basically having these little AI agents that work on your behalf and do the things that we expect people to do sometimes, but we know they're sometimes be a little bit lazy, but these AI agents can go out into the digital world and do it for you. And this idea of digital wallets and digital sovereignty and owning your own data, these are all things that we're working on at TeamKinetic. Now, we're not working on them in a vacuum. We did put out some research via the Digital and Volunteering Community of Practice, and we had 190 responses to our survey. And the top 3 challenges that came from you guys as volunteer managers was monitoring and reporting evaluation. 44% of the volunteer managers that responded told us that was a big challenge. That was one of their big challenges. Ongoing volunteer management and communication, and then the onboarding process more generally. In terms of recruitment, number 1 was people wanted to recruit younger volunteers, and I'm quite confident in the heritage sector that is probably one of your main challenges is attracting those younger volunteers into these roles. The second group that was being requested for the most was working professionals with particular skills, so skills match volunteering. And the third one was mature adults and retirees. I'd be intrigued at people. Does that fit with you guys in the heritage sector? Do those feel appropriate? Again, I'm going to borrow from Matt. Throw a thumbs up. If it's not, throw a thumbs down. Let me know what you think. And then the engagement challenges. And I think this is really where there's a real opportunity. This idea of flexibility and being able to offer opportunities that suit the individual in their particular context, in their particular current life situation. The financial concerns, I think, we've been talking about it for the last 3 or 4 years. The cost of living is only getting more and more challenging for volunteers and for organisations. And then the one that's come up a few times for me over the last couple of months is this mismatch between expectations of volunteers and the sector more broadly, and how, as a sector, we can be more empathetic to the needs of volunteers and the different requirements that they have. Some of the other interesting findings from the survey that we run was where people are advertising their opportunities. And although we spend a lot of time worrying about national platforms, only 21% of the respondents seem to use them. So maybe we're wasting our time worrying about all that all the time. People's own websites predominantly are the main place in which they're digitally looking to recruit volunteers. Volunteer centres are still massively important, would see, to the 200 respondents to this particular survey. In real life, thank the Lord, in real life is still important. We can still talk to each other and recommend each other opportunities and word of mouth. And then the national platforms and somebody else's websites, they're all in there. But I thought it was an interesting finding as to where people are actually currently advertising their opportunities. And then one of the final things I wanted to talk about is this looming monster I mentioned at the start, AI. And it was interesting when we asked the questions where we were looking at people's attitudes and adoption to AI. It's already here. People are using it, whether they're using it ethically, appropriately, safely. is up for debate. Whether we have the skills as a sector to be able to know we're doing these things, again, is up for debate. And whether or not the companies that are providing these things are providing the information to enable us to make those choices is all up for debate. But we're certainly using it. And the 200 respondents, 80% of them said they're already using it in some way, shape, or form in their work. And 85% of the organisation said they're using it somewhere in their business. So it's here. It's here to stay. I don't think we can avoid it. How we choose to use it moving forward, I think, is going to be really important as a sector, and making good ethical choices is going to be really key. Efficiency is the number one reason people said they have chose to use it, and 92% think efficiency is the top reason to use it. We really didn't ask the question, though, which maybe we should have followed up with, which is, has it made them more efficient? Which is maybe, again, up for debate. There is an awful lot of AI slop out in the world, and whether or not it's actually making us better, making us more effective, I think there's still quite a bit of room for better data on that. And the top three concerns around AI, you see the information, data privacy and security, and a dependence on that technology and those technology providers. So there's some interesting sort of insight from what you guys as volunteer managers are finding out there. Again, I'd be intrigued. Just a thumbs up, thumbs down. How many people have used AI as part of their sort of day-to-day job, or are using it on a regular basis? Give us a little thumbs up or a thumbs down if you're not. I knew you are, Rob. You're a prolific user. You're good. You're good with it. Okay. If you want to see the full report, and there's an awful lot more insight to be gained from that survey, please feel free to scan that QR code and you can download the report in your own time. Having all that information, though, what do we want you to do with it? If you want to know more about how digital can impact your practice, then we set up the Digital in Volunteering Community of Practice about 18 months ago with myself, Ruth Leonard, and Gethin Williams. We work around this concept, this Venn diagram of scale, efficiency, and experience. And we're looking at in each of those dimensions where digital can help you as a volunteer manager deliver a bigger program, a better program, and a better experience for everybody involved. If you're interested, there is another toolkit. There's always a toolkit knocking around that you can download from our website. And there's lots and lots more content that we're trying to put together. We're very much looking at the community being a community where our members have got good examples of practical use of technology and digital that have changed their practice. They come and bring them to the community and we share them as we're going along. If you want to sign up, there's the QR code, and that's me just about done. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Chris. What you couldn't see was me saying 1 minute to Chris in the film. So that's good.
I could see it, I could see it. I could feel the pressure.
Oh, well, there you go. And he ignored me anyway. Fabulous. Thank you so much, Chris. So you've heard three quite different sort of takes on some of the themes to look out for over the next year. But what we really want to do now is answer some of your questions. So I've posted in the chat the Pigeonhole. So that's where you can post your questions, and you can also upvote those of others. So we're going to take them in order. So we're actually going to go to our eminent chair for our first question. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to those highlighted as who the question's directed to, and then see if our other panelists would like to chip in. Matt, what is the strategic role of volunteers in resilience planning for the heritage sector? Not a small question, that.
I think there's an entire HVG event in that, isn't there, Rhiannon? I think it's really interesting. I mean, I have run a session on that very, very subject, really. So I think if you look at it at an organisational level, it's about first of all thinking about what is the strategic purpose of volunteering or our organisation, having that conversation with the senior leadership team so you can build alignment around why you involve volunteers within your organisation. That should then filter down and help you develop a plan around the activities that volunteers partake in, and then you can start to think about how do we attract the right audiences into those roles. So there's this. So you're looking at that big picture. Why do we involve volunteers? What roles do we need volunteers to do? what types of people do we want to involve in those activities, so that we can not only deliver the activities, but we can also deliver the organisational broader strategic aims, and where and how do we recruit those volunteers into the organisation. You know, are we going to engage the audiences that we want to and recruit the volunteers in the numbers that we need to in order to be resilient, simply by putting role descriptions on our website, or do people go to other places than our website? And so that's about thinking broadly, you know, not only just those traditional places where we might have advertised, you know, universities and volunteer centres, but actually thinking about, you know, the partners that we might want to work with to engage new audiences in volunteering. And it was really telling, Chris, on your slide, that nobody put partners down there. No, I don't know whether it wasn't an option in the way that the question was structured, but we really need to get better at working with our friends within the third sector and creating volunteer opportunities that work for those service users at those charities, but which also help us deliver our volunteering activities, and in so doing, building resilience. So, like I say, there's a whole workshop on that subject, but hopefully that provided a good answer for our questionnaire.
Rob, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think it relates to as well to a point Alex put in the chat about the engagement challenge around aging population. You know, every time I see people talking about resilience or sustainability, whether it's the heritage sector, the non-profit sector generally, the subtext of that conversation quite often, excluding what Matt was just saying, is financial sustainability and financial resilience, particularly at the kind of moment that we're in, where money is tight, getting tighter. You know, the economy is not necessarily in the greatest health and impacting all of us. And again, this is where the problem comes of a kind of disconnect between leadership's view of volunteering, which is very often very kind of tactical and operational, rather than a strategic view. So actually, the volunteering and the work that we do at HVG has got a really, really important role to play in that strategic planning, so that organizations can look at what's the best way of getting stuff done, rather than what can we pay for, and then volunteers coming as an afterthought as part of that. And going back to Alex's comment, it's about recognizing that as maybe the older, more reliable generations that have shored our organizations up for so many years transition out of volunteering. The generations behind them won't volunteer in the same way. And so we need to be planning now for how we're going to get the people who'll give you an hour of their time this week to give you a day a week for the next 20 years within a reasonable time frame, so that we are resilient going into the future. Only looking at it for money, we're not going to be properly resilient.
Matt, you want to come back?
Yeah, ironically, on that point about being economically sustainable and the role that volunteering can play in that, and I think it's really interesting. Obviously, a lot of what I was talking about was kind of this role that volunteering can play in helping us build political capital, and part of that, being absolutely frank, is about how do we use volunteering in its widest sense to access financial pots of money that might be held by local politicians and local councils. And that isn't to say we're looking, you know, so if I talk, you know, in specific terms about what we're doing at Science Museum Group, we've moved from where we were 10 years ago, where we were simply focusing on we need bums on seats, Matt, to how can volunteering serve our strategic ambitions around skills development and talent support, and how do we frame that around the relationships that our directors have with DCMS and with local funders, so that they can see a clear link between what we're doing as an organisation and with volunteering, and then will support us financially. So I think the balance for us is to design volunteer programs, as it always is to design volunteer programs that serve the operational needs of the site, that serve the needs of the people that are volunteering with us, and that address broader political ambitions that will allow us to grow our influence and access money and goodwill that might, you know, serve a whole range of other different aspects of what we're trying to do as an organisation.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I do not disagree with anything that Rob and Matt have just said. One one of the interesting things that came out of the survey, one of the comments that was left was when trying to attract audiences, and there's a number of questions about the different audiences that people are trying to talk to and attract. One of the things that came out was if you're trying to attract a 22-year-old young volunteer right now and you're only putting that on your website, you're invisible to them. You don't exist. And as organizations starting to appreciate the myriad of channels that are out there, and the fact that the cost of being able to operate them channels is continuing to come down, but having an understanding of what is out there and how you access it is a really big challenge, I think, for the sector. If you're a middle-aged volunteer manager that has no interest in Snapchat or TikTok, how do you know how to go about putting an advert together for some of those channels to try and attract those people that are maybe the younger volunteers that you're trying to reach? So sort of slightly different view to slightly different angles to what we're talking about here, but it's in terms of if you have your strategic goals and you want to lean into skills development, can you then attract the people you want to attract to achieve your strategic goals is kind of the point I'm coming to.
Lovely. And I'm gonna, before we come to Matt, there is a very aligned question that is the next highest. So maybe we can try and weave a bit of that in, which is how within heritage volunteering can we better position volunteering as a solution to strengthening communities in a time of increased social division? And we're starting to sort of move into some of that. So to you, Matt, first, and then we'll go to Rob.
I was just mulling Chris's point over. Can you just repeat the question for me?
How within heritage volunteering can we better position volunteering as a solution to strengthening communities in a time of increased social division? And obviously what we were talking about just then was reaching a range of people. So sort of a nice partial segue, maybe.
I suppose there's two answers to this. One's straightforward, one's kind of takes a bit of time. I suppose that the first part is take time to understand your local community. Take time to read boring political documents, or and gen up on what are the issues affecting the local community, and build volunteering programs that connects and serves those local needs. I suppose more practically, bring people together from across the social divide. I think, Chris, you kind of touched on this about in a world of AI and increasing social disconnection, volunteering is an incredibly powerful tool for bringing humans together, creating social connections, and all the benefits that can mean. And that I suppose is in part why making our volunteer programs is so important, because actually if we're bringing 85-year-olds and 22-year-olds and everybody in between together, if we're bringing people from different ethnic backgrounds together, if we're bringing people from different economic backgrounds together, we're creating connections. And it's through shared experience and shared learning that we start to build bridges as a society. And that's why I think volunteering is so important. And again, this is the sort of stuff that we need to be saying to politicians. If we can build diverse volunteer programs, we become a powerful hub for cross-cultural connections within our communities, and we need to let people know about that.
We'll go Chris, and then we'll come to you, Rob.
Yeah, again, it's sort of leaning to my previous point. I'm not just thinking about recruitment of new volunteers and using these channels. We're living in a time of disconnect where we're told that it's not safe to walk the streets of London because of what's on social media, and to some extent we need to be pushing back against that with our own content, our own little videos, our own little snippets, our own memes, our own wall of positive content that shows the amazing work that the sector does do. The relationships that are there. You're doing that in real life, but I think we also need to sort of appreciate that there is a virtual sphere that we need to be present in, and creating a counter argument to that is currently prevalent.
Lovely. Anything to add, Rob? So this question was originally posed to you and Matt. So any thoughts you have?
Yeah, I suppose the only thing I would add, because it links to the time well spent research, so it's kind of evidence based, is that when the original time well spent research was published in 2019, it came out with 8 things that needed to be present in all volunteer roles and volunteer experiences. to make them meaningful and positive, and connected was one of those, that sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves and to something meaningful. And Matt touched on it. I think in a society where we're increasingly atomized, people are increasingly kind of hold polar opposite views and what have you, and where we feel that it might be really difficult, we feel frustrated. It's really difficult to make a difference to an issue that we're passionate about, because there's just so many things going on in the world at the same time. That sense of belonging and connection to something bigger than yourself, which, organized religion used to provide as a majority for people in this country, and it doesn't quite so much anymore. There's a role that our organizations can play in providing that kind of sense of connection and identity. And I think it's something that volunteer involving organizations across all sectors and subsectors don't maximize enough of.
Now, I'd just to come in on that, and something that Chris touched on, we've got I talk quite a bit about, I guess, kind of the fact that as volunteer engagement professionals, we need to think about ourselves as marketeers as much as anything else, really. And, in terms of kind of what Rob was saying, we need to think about, how do we connect what we do as an organization to that passion that people have to make a difference, so really emphasizing that within the role descriptions that we write, but equally kind of tailoring the content and the role descriptions that we write for the different audiences that we want to connect with. Chris, if you just put, your bog standard role description on your website, you're barely scratching the surface in terms of the people that you can connect with. And I think that's where, for me, like, AI has got a role to play in helping us do this. You can quickly take your role description, run it through AI, ask it to write it for a specific audience, then read it and check it, folks. Don't just let it spit something out and put it on your website. That is not what we recommend here at HVG. But it can really help you write for your audience in a specific way. And I think people like podcasts, digital marketing podcasts, absolutely fantastic, and I'd recommend checking that out.
Well, that's a brilliant segue. Some really great chat in the chat function. So do check that out and do contribute to the conversations as they're evolving. But that actually segues really neatly into the next question, Matt, which is directed at Chris and Rob, but please chip in, which is, how should I be engaging with AI in my volunteer management practice? And then as an add-on to there is, what is the impact of using AI on the environment, culturally and socially, and any thoughts you have? So Chris, come to you first on that one.
Yeah, so Rob will go first. That's okay. The environmental impact is really, really difficult to put your finger on. The companies involved in it are rightly very private because they're obviously uncomfortable with what's going on. So it's a really tricky topic to get trustworthy data on. And we're doing some work with the guys at the Wildlife Trust who have done quite a deep dive into this, and they're struggling to find reliable data. So the ecological impact is real. It's definitely going on. Unfortunately, the genie's out of the bottle. I don't know if not using it is necessarily going to stop that environmental impact any. So that there is that. In terms of how to interact with it, I think the key thing is there's so many ways in which you can interact with it that I couldn't go through them all here. I think the key thing is to make yourself aware of the limitations of it, the risks of it. So when you are using it, you can protect yourself from when it goes a bit wrong, when it makes things up, when it hallucinates, what the risks are around bias, how to be aware of the insipid little ways that it can make you think it knows something that it actually doesn't know. Okay, so that would be my advice to people, is to go and do the workshops that are out there. Charity Digital has one. There's Dandelion is another consultancy that provide them for the charitable sector. That would be my advice: is be aware of the risks, and then you can mitigate them to some extent, and also be aware of be aware of the I've lost my train of thought because I just started reading what map on the right side of the screen there in terms of the in terms, and it threw me out. It threw me off. So I'll hand over to Rob because you have something more interesting to me scratching my head to remember what I was about to say.
Yeah, so a couple of things on the environmental impact. I mean, what Matt's put there's quite striking. Two different observations I'd make on that. Living in a household where some of the young people I live with are adamantly firmly against AI for those reasons. That Seth Godin defined AI as anything a computer can't do at the moment. We are having existential qualms about the extent to which artificial intelligence is using electricity and energy, particularly in drier parts of the world, water to cool the data centers, despite the fact we barely blinked an eyelid when we sit down and watch Netflix and all the various different streaming services, and we use platforms like Zoom, and all our data gets stored in the cloud, that is all using the same kind of stuff. It's just AI is bringing it into focus because of the amount of energy it is using. So, if we're going to be completely principled about that, we would ditch most of the technology that we live with day to day. The second thing, and it's an interesting perspective from a guy that I follow, and I'll talk very briefly about him in a second because I've got a couple of links to put in the chat, was actually the energy challenge around AI. We always look on negatively, but could actually be the prompt that society needs to make the kind of investments in what we know is beginning to become potentially viable in the future, things like fusion energy, which is nuclear but safe, clean, largely unlimited power. But we've got real problems with being able to scale the potential of that because of the amount of investment that's required. We know these AI companies are huge in terms of the amount of money that they've got in them. So it may well be that they can't fulfill the desire for the energy that's needed through traditional forms of energy production. And that prompts a new and innovative approach. And, that's the kind of thing that we should be encouraging rather than kind of maybe throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In terms of how you use AI, I think everything that Chris has said, but I think the important thing is to link it into your work. It's great to go out and have a play around, see if it can write haikus and all that kind of stuff for you, but actually root it into the work that you are doing. So the number one golden rule is don't put any sensitive information into an AI. So don't go uploading your volunteers' contact details and what have you so that it can do some kind of AI-powered mail merge. But there's a guy called Raheem who I follow who runs a newsletter called Box of Amazing. It's published every Sunday. Really encourage people to go and look at Box of Amazing because it's not AI evangelism and it's not rampant AI skepticism. It's rooted in a lot of the kind of practical and conceptual stuff around it that's really important. And he wrote 2 articles last year. I'll put the links to them as well as the link to the newsletter in the chat, both of which have got really practical exercises that you can do. One is a 10-minute exercise. One is something you can do over a week to explore how you do your work and how AI could amplify and support you in doing that, rather than just kind of blindly running off to a Gemini or a Claude or a Chat GPT and playing around with it. So it's a much more kind of strategic and intentional approach.
Thank you, Rob. And actually, Box of Amazing, that may have been you that replied to that question, but there's some links in there already.
It was me. I put that in there in case it didn't get asked. Now I've put the same thing in the chat.
Back to you, Chris. Any thoughts reflecting on what Rob said?
I just remember what my point was before I got distracted, which is it's a fast-moving technology. I mean, in the last 2 years, it's unbelievable where it's come from to where we are right now, and companies and organisations are catching up, sort of are trying to catch up. So just be aware of your own company's policies on this stuff. Well, we know that 1 or 2 of the organisations we work with now have quite strict policies, and their employees are being strongly encouraged to be aware of what they can and can't do. So just be involved in that conversation at an organisation level if you can, and make sure you're able to keep yourself informed and inform the conversation more broadly where something is useful to you that you might want to use, and make sure there's a policy for it in place so you don't come unstuck.
Fabulous. Some great practical tips, and I'm definitely going to be looking at the box of amazing. I've dabbled already, but it's only jazzed things up so far. We've got a couple of questions that are a bit more about volunteering and sort of political side, but I'm going to jump to a more practical question first, and perhaps we'll end on that. And that is around, how do you see volunteering commitment and the amount of hours, the contributions made by volunteers changing in 2026-27 due to the pressures in society, economy, personal life, and the rest of stuff? And this has been aimed at Matt and Rob, but I'm sure you've all got something to add. So, Rob, you're not on mute, so maybe we come to you first.
I'm happy to kick off. And I'll kick off very quickly with the, is it fair to politicise volunteering? Yes, it is, because volunteering is the ultimate act of democracy. So politicising it in the small p rather than the big P way. I think it's... I think we've got enough data now from the Community Life Survey survey, Rihanna, to be able to say that, and the most recent set of data was published just before Christmas, that unless something significantly radical happens around volunteering in England over the course of the next 12 months, it is highly unlikely that we are going to see any significant changes in volunteering commitment and the amount of time that people are giving at a national level. If you've not seen the data, basically volunteering dropped to historic lows in the year that we were all in lockdown, and it has barely moved back anywhere close to where it, well, barely moved at all from those lows. And we're now 6 years on from that first lockdown kicking in almost. So in England, I really don't see anything shifting that at scale that's going to change things. Within individual organisations, certainly. The news is slightly more positive in Scotland and Northern Ireland, where volunteering rates have recovered to where they were pre-COVID, although hours are going down. We do not yet know exactly why, and my suspicion, if I had to be pressed on it, is that Scotland and Northern Ireland have a stronger local volunteering infrastructure than England does. Ours has been decimated by the austerity agenda of recent years. The fact that hours are going down, I just think, is not a problem to be solved. It's a reality to be faced. This is just how things are these days. And that doesn't mean people will never give you a long-term commitment. It means, as I implied earlier, you have to work harder to get them to scale up over time to the point that they can give you a long-term commitment. So I don't think we will see those. The hours data is not readily available in England, by the way, with Community Life Survey, which is why I'm not answering that in England. I just think it's the reality of how we are at the moment, and I think we need to think differently. And that's why it's so important that our organisational leadership grasps the strategic opportunities and challenges about volunteering, because otherwise we're moving in one direction, they're pulling in another, and it doesn't serve anybody very well.
Lovely. Matt, anything to add?
I was trying to think. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with everything Rob has said, as I usually do. I'm not sure that I don't think there's anything that we've not said already. I think there's a key here about given that rates are lower than they have been pre-COVID, there's a need, but we've been talking about this for a long time, to create more flexible roles, to remove barriers to participation, to shorten that time between initial expression of interest and start. Chris was talking about Amazon. People want the deliveries yesterday. People want the volunteering yesterday as well. How can we make that happen? What can we do as professionals to speed up that starting process? They're all the things that we kind of need to be thinking about, but I don't think that's anything different in 26, 27 to 24, 25, or even 23, 24. I think we've been talking about it at HVG for a while. Oh, you're on mute, Rhiannon.
I added myself back on mute. Perfect. There's a question that's been added into the comments for this question, which is, doesn't the MDE annual survey data paint a more positive picture about volunteer engagement for museums and the wider volunteer involving sector? Anything you can speak to that on, Rob?
Not me, because I'm not familiar with it, because I don't delve that deep into individual sectors, because I can't, because I've got clients across so many. But Matt might be more, put Matt on the spot.
I haven't looked at the most recent data set. I think so I can't comment comment on that specifically. I think, Rob, you touched on, we have seen this uptick in volunteering rates in Wales and Scotland, and it
Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Scotland and Northern Ireland, sorry, yeah. So it wouldn't be unsurprising that we might be seeing regional differences. And there are, if you look at the Community Life Survey data, you will see that there are different rates, quite significantly different rates for volunteering in different parts of the country. So yes, people will be on this call from all over the UK.
What I would say, Rhiannon, is if it is showing that positive uptick, that's absolutely fantastic and that's brilliant. And I'm sure we're seeing it in other sectors as well. The important thing is not for the message to be, we're seeing the uptick back to levels of volunteering, everything's hunky-dory, we don't need to change. Because which I'm not saying that is the message from the report, but if that's the message people take on from more positive data, the challenge then becomes one of actually the world is changing around us and we do need to adapt. And if we fail to, that upswing won't last. And it's how do we make it sustainable?
I think that's a really, really helpful comment. Helen, do you want to come in from your perspective?
It was only on that tiny point, and I've just popped the link to museum development. It's actually an annual museum survey done across England of all the different regions, and we've got now 5 years worth of data in there. So if you pop to our own link, you can then access other regions as well. There's a national data set, and there's also our own. Yes, variable depending on the type. Bruce has just kindly added about across accredited museums some recovery, but it really does vary. So the regions don't quite compare with each other. That was all.
Thank you, Helen and Bruce. Great to have that input. Chris, over to you, and then we're going to start to wrap up.
Yeah, it's more to support what Rob said. I think the trend is trending the wrong way. I think place-based, strong community-based opportunities are probably more resilient to that trend generally, and museums and heritage venues tend to have that stronger community associated with, so that they probably haven't seen the same drop as you may have seen in some other types of volunteering. But I do think the trend is what it is, and that requirement for flexibility, that requirement for better targeting, that requirement for it pains me to say, a more consumerized approach to volunteering, i.e. understanding who you want to volunteer, how you want to attract them, etc., using those marketing tools and being as flexible as the other leisure activities you're competing with is really important for the sector to be moving in that direction and be aware of those tools and those skills and those requirements that are going to attract people moving forward.
Lovely. Thank you all. And actually, Rob cheated earlier by answering 2 questions in one. So I do want to give Matt and Chris an opportunity to see if they'd like to come in on this. So this is a question around, is it fair to politicise volunteering? By associating volunteering with political party ambitions, doesn't that alienate and breach volunteer trust and further us away from them wanting to be change catalysts? You've heard Rob's opinion. Matt, any quick thoughts on that one? It's not a quick question, but quick thoughts.
No, so I would say no. This is about our ability to look at how volunteering can serve our organisational needs in the broadest sense, whilst delivering on the needs of those who are volunteering with us. And actually, like I said, I touched on, I'm doing this piece of work at the moment for Science Museum Group, but I also did it under the Conservative government. And although the focus and the language might change, a lot of skills development and things like that, they're priorities. They've been priorities for both parties. So it's about our ability to be able to utilise that to the effect of our organisation, and I don't think it should. I started with those 3 questions about should volunteering be used as a tool to help people live healthier lives for longer. We might frame that within a political conversation when our leaders are talking to local councillors, but as everybody gave us a thumbs up on the call, that's the sort of thing we should be doing anyway. So it's just about how we use what we're doing to serve broader ambitions that are going to serve our organisation. And ultimately, that's going to build reputation of volunteering within the organisation. It's going to build our influence. It's going to build our impact and mean that we can deliver volunteering more effectively moving forwards.
Wonderful. And what a great way to end a great session. A huge thank you to Rob, Matt, and Chris for some really interesting insights. Loads of great stuff in the chat as well. So do take the links that you like the look of before we close off. I am going to launch the evaluation poll. So if you do have a moment to complete that, I'd really appreciate it.